Now, back in my early years as the member for Fanny Bay, I was door-knocking a resident in Allen Street, directly behind the Fanny Bay jail. He'd been there all of his life, and as a kid, he remembered watching prisoners climb over the wall in the dark, heading out for the night, but returning before dawn. It seemed an improbable story, but after reading Mickey's history of the Fanny Bay jail, called Inside Out and published in 1999, I decided it was probably true. The jail had a notorious reputation for harshness, but ironically also one for informality and freedom. Mickey wrote Inside Out when she was the curator of Territory History and Regional Museums at the Museum and Art Gallery here in Darwin, and managing the Fanny Bay jail was one of her tasks. Again, Mickey's research was wide-ranging, masses of official documents and records in the archives, although to her disappointment, war, cyclones and administrative sloppiness had left some gaps. The newspapers of the day were vital for their reports of crimes, punishments, community attitudes and commentary. And then there were the oral histories. So many people, like my constituent, who had clear memories of the jail and the activities in and around that institution. Fanny Bay Jail opened in 1883, and for 96 years it was the tangible symbol of law and order in the Northern Territory. In telling its story, Mickey described who was jailed, why they were jailed, what jail conditions were like, the work prisoners did, the punishments, and the occasional executions that took place, the last of which was 1952. The Chinese were locked up for smoking and trafficking opium, Aboriginal people often for being in prohibited areas. Prisoners were there for crimes of violence and murder. In the Depression, men were jailed for riding the rail. Drunkenness was common, and famously a bunch of unionists led by Harold Nelson ended up in there as well. It was 1921 when Harold and 19 others, including the mayor, were locked up for not paying their taxes. No taxation without representation was their campaign against the Commonwealth. For this star-studded group of prisoners, their incarceration was certainly not all hardship. Mickey tells us, after the leaders had been jailed at Fanny Bay, the Darwin citizenry visited the jail en masse, bringing Sunday roast lunches, pies and jellies and waving red flags. Outside the jail walls, the Darwin brass band played stirring marches. It's a wonderful irony that jail time didn't hold Harold Nelson back. The campaign for representation was successful, and Harold became the Territory's first federal member in Canberra. Another famous inmate was the legendary Aboriginal leader Nemiluk, convicted for killing 3 Japanese fishermen. He escaped for a time, but was recaptured. Historians are divided about what was his eventual fate. Did he die in Fanny Bay Jail, or was he pardoned and released? That second opinion was very possible, because in February 1942, after Darwin had been extensively bombed, Supreme Court Justice Thomas Wells was instructed by Administrator Abbott to release and pardon the 39 prisoners in Fanny Bay Jail, 19 of whom had life sentences. Judge Wells is reputed to have said to those he was releasing, "Among you, there are men I sentenced to long jail terms for killing Japanese pearlers. I'm letting you go. From now on, you can kill as many Japanese as you can find. And instead of a jail sentence, you will probably get a medal." So it seems for a handful of Darwin residents, the bombings of 1942 brought unexpected opportunities. Perhaps Nemiluk was one of them. Once again, Mickey has chosen a subject for research that might have initially been seen as quite restricted, the history of a penal institution, but not so. This inside-out story of Fanny Bay Jail is a lively social, political and judicial history of 100 years of Darwin and the Territory. Mickey experienced the difference between working as an academic historian, writing the kind of books I've been talking about so far, and what was required of a public historian when she started her work as the history curator at the museum. She said the key difference was that she was no longer writing for an academic audience who had a professional understanding of historical issues. Instead, she was a public historian dealing with the general public who came to history with diverse perspectives and challengingly, and to quote her, had their own ideas about the past, formed by any number of things: what their father told them, what they'd read, what they'd seen on television, or what they believed in their hearts about the nature of the event. This difference emerged starkly for Mickey in her first curatorial task, which was the redevelopment of the Cyclone Tracy Gallery to mark 20 years since the cyclone had devastated Darwin. To do that, she moved the popular old display that was installed at the Fanny Bay Jail and built a new exhibition at the museum. The move did not go unnoticed by the general public, as Mickey later reflected. "Okay," she said, "so the letters to the paper, radio stories, news items, political comment, staff complaints, and members of the public weeping to me were a surprise. But a big chunk of me liked it a lot. Even if people were abusing me, at least they were engaging with interpretations of the past in a passionate and vigorous way." It was with some amusement and much satisfaction that Mickey watched her new Cyclone Gallery shed its controversial beginnings and become, along with the iconic Sweetheart, the most visited exhibit at the museum. Mickey once described the gallery's status as like a shrine that could never be changed or updated. 24 years on, there have been some small changes, but the Cyclone Tracy Gallery is very much how it was in 1994. An exhibition that tells the cyclone story through art, artefacts and architecture. The sound room is still eerie, midnight mass mixing with Tracy's winds at the Catholic Cathedral. And the press button accounts by locals of that night are still as fresh as they were when they were first told.